If you look at the second half of the 20th century, two silhouettes dominate the landscape of global conflict. On the left, the curved magazine and wooden stock of the AK-47. On the right, the sleek, black, futuristic lines of the M16. These aren't just weapons, they are the physical manifestations of two clashing superpowers. But to understand how we got here, we have to rewind to the bloody ruins of World War II. Back then, infantry combat was a mess of mismatched doctrines. Armies fielded bolt-action rifles that could kill a man at 800 meters. But most firefights actually happened at under 300 meters. Soldiers were carrying heavy, overpowered rifles that were practically useless in close-quarters urban combat. Submachine guns, on the other hand, were great for clearing rooms, but fired pistol cartridges that bounced off trees at long range. The world needed a compromise. Germany was the first to solve this puzzle with the Sturmgewehr 44, literally translating to assault rifle. It fired an intermediate cartridge, smaller than a standard rifle bullet, bigger than a pistol bullet. It had a fire selector switch for both semi-automatic and fully automatic fire. It was a revelation, while the STG-44 came too late to save the Third Reich. Its core philosophy survived. The major powers realized that whoever perfected this concept would dominate the next era of warfare. The race was on. In the Soviet Union, the solution would come from the mind of a wounded poet. In the United States, it would come from a brilliant aviation engineer. Let's meet our two completely different inventors. Enter Mikhail Kalashnikov. In 1941, he was a Soviet tank commander whose vehicle was obliterated by German artillery at the Battle of Bryansk. While recovering in a hospital bed, listening to the complaints of wounded infantrymen, Kalashnikov became obsessed with designing a better gun for the Soviet soldier. He wasn't a trained engineer, he was a peasant who understood the harsh realities of the Eastern Front. His philosophy was simple: the weapon had to be idiot-proof. It had to work in the freezing Siberian winter, the muddy Rasputitsa, and it had to be manufactured by a workforce that largely consisted of unskilled laborers and women on the home front. After several iterations, in 1947, he finalized the Avtomat Kalashnikova. The AK-47 was a masterpiece of crude efficiency. It was built with loose tolerances. This meant the internal moving parts had extra space between them. If mud, sand, or carbon built up inside, the gun just kept firing because the mechanisms had room to push the debris out of the way. It was heavy, built with a milled steel receiver, and slapped together with birch wood. It fired the heavy 7.62 by 39mm cartridge, designed to punch through brush and light cover. It wasn't particularly accurate beyond 300 meters. But accuracy wasn't the point. Volume of fire and absolute, unquestionable reliability were. Kalashnikov created a hammer, enter a hammer. Every problem is a nail. Halfway across the world in a sunny Californian workshop, a completely different approach was brewing. Eugene Stoner wasn't a frontline infantryman. He was a brilliant aerospace engineer working for a small company called Armite. Stoner looked at the heavy steel and wood weapons of the past and saw outdated dinosaurs. Why use wood when you have aircraft-grade aluminum? Why use heavy steel when you can use modern fiberglass and plastics? His philosophy was rooted in high-tech precision and weight reduction. In the late 1950s, the US military needed a lighter rifle. Stoner scaled down his previous AR-10 design to create the R-15, which the military would later designate as the M16. Stoner's rifle looked like it came from a sci-fi movie. It was incredibly light, meaning a soldier could carry significantly more ammunition. Instead of a heavy bullet, it fired a tiny, lightweight 5.56mm cartridge at incredibly high speeds. The physics behind it were terrifying. The lightweight bullet traveled so fast that when it hit a target, it tumbled and fragmented, causing catastrophic damage. This made it phenomenally accurate, with barely any recoil. It was an engineer's dream. But this high-tech marvel was about to be dropped into the worst environment imaginable. To truly understand the rivalry, we have to look inside. This is where the engineering philosophies literally clash. Let's look at the operating systems. The AK-47 uses a long-stroke gas piston. When a bullet is fired, some of the expanding gas behind it is siphoned into a tube above the barrel. This gas violently pushes a massive steel piston backward, which unlocks the bolt, ejects the spent casing, and loads a new one. It is a heavy, violent action. It causes the gun to kick up when firing. But that heavy mass is exactly what crushes through dirt and grime. It's brute force engineering. The M16, however, uses a system often called direct impingement. When fired, the hot gas is siphoned into a tiny, narrow tube and blown directly into the receiver, right into the bolt carrier group itself. There is no heavy piston. This is why the M16 has almost no recoil. There is less moving mass. It shoots like a dream, keeping the shooter precisely on target. But here is the fatal flaw: blowing hot, dirty gas directly into the tightly fitted internal mechanisms means the gun essentially poops where it eats. Carbon builds up quickly. If you don't clean it, those tight tolerances will seize up. The AK assumes the user will abuse it. The M16 assumes the user will meticulously maintain it. Theory met reality in the steaming jungles of Vietnam. This was the ultimate proving ground for the two philosophies. The North Vietnamese army and the Viet Cong were heavily supplied with AK-47s and its stamped steel successor, the AKM. In the humid, muddy, miserable conditions of the jungle, the AK was in its element. A guerrilla fighter could drag it through a swamp, leave it buried in a tunnel, pick it up weeks later, and it would still fire. The heavy 7.62 bullet easily chewed through the thick jungle foliage. On the American side, the introduction of the M16 was an unmitigated disaster. The rifle was marketed by the Department of Defense as self-cleaning. Because of this arrogant claim, early troops weren't even issued cleaning kits. To make matters worse, the military secretly changed the type of gunpowder used in the 5.56 cartridges to a cheaper, dirtier type. The result was tragic. The dirty powder clogged the tiny gas tube. The tight tolerances seized in the jungle humidity. Young American soldiers were found dead in the jungle. Their rifles disassembled next to them as they desperately tried to clear jams during firefights. The M16 quickly earned a reputation as a fragile, unreliable piece of plastic. The crisis in Vietnam forced massive congressional hearings. How could the wealthiest, most technologically advanced military on Earth issue a defective weapon? The fixes came rapidly. The military introduced the M16A1. They chrome-lined the chamber to prevent rust, changed the powder back to the cleaner formula, added a forward assist button to manually push the bolt forward if it got stuck, and crucially, issued cleaning kits with comic book-style manuals telling soldiers how to maintain their rifles. Once properly maintained, the M16A1 became a highly lethal, effective weapon. The lightweight ammo meant platoons could lay down massive volumes of fire. But the cultural damage was done. The imagery of the Vietnam War cemented the reputations of both weapons. The AK-47 became the ultimate symbol of the underdog, the revolutionary, and the anti-imperialist fighter. The M16 became the symbol of the Western Bloc, of high-tech military-industrial complexes, and professional armies. The Cold War had found its avatars. As the Cold War raged on, the proliferation of these weapons took completely different paths. The Soviet Union practically gave the AK-47 away. They handed the blueprints to allied nations across the Warsaw Pact, China, and beyond. They wanted to arm the global proletariat. The design was so simple that illicit factories sprang up everywhere, from the mountains of Pakistan to the jungles of South America. It is estimated that over 100 million AK-type rifles have been produced globally. It is so iconic that it's literally on the national flag of Mozambique. It became the weapon of choice for cartels, pirates, and insurgents. Because it was cheap, abundant, and required zero training, the M16, meanwhile, followed a capitalist trajectory. It was sold to NATO allies and pro-Western governments. It remained relatively expensive to produce, and required a logistical tale of spare parts and cleaning supplies. While millions were made, it never matched the sheer, terrifying numerical supremacy of the Kalashnikov. The AK flooded the black market, permanently altering the balance of power in developing nations. So, which rifle actually won the Cold War? It depends on how you measure victory. If you measure by sheer survival, proliferation, and global impact, the AK-47 is the undisputed king. It is the most abundant firearm in human history and remains a geopolitical force. However, if you look at modern military evolution, Eugene Stoner's philosophy proved to be the future. The AK-47 is notoriously difficult to upgrade. Mounting modern optics, lasers, and accessories to its stamped steel cover is clunky. The M16, however, evolved beautifully. Its modular design allowed it to shrink into the M4 carbine, easily adopting Picatinny rails, scopes, and suppressors. Today, almost every modern military, including Russia's elite units, uses rifles that lean heavily into Stoner's philosophy of lightweight materials, high velocity small calibers, and modularity. Mikhail Kalashnikov built a weapon for the 20th century conscript. Eugene Stoner built a weapon that laid the foundation for the 21st century professional. In the end, neither truly won. Instead, they locked the world in a lethal stalemate.